Hello everyone, welcome back again. I am Samapti Sinha Mahapatra, your zoology teacher teaching in Sri Chaitanya Institute. Students, we were discussing about the chapter breathing and exchange of gases. We have already discussed in the previous class regarding the different respiratory volumes. Yes, we were talking about the respiratory volumes and capacities. We were done with the respiratory volumes. We made a graph like this exactly. I explained it to you, but I am explaining it once again because we are still left with a very important part of this that's related with the capacities. Alright, now I told you in the previous class that looking at this diagram, you will always say that this much part which is going up till here represents normal inhalation, and this part going down till this much represents normal exhalation. Normal inhalation, normal exhalation. We discussed that the amount of air that you can forcefully inhale after normal inhalation, that is this much, represents your inspiratory reserved volume or IRV. Also, the amount of air, this is normal exhalation, the amount of air that you can forcefully exhale out, this much was called as expiratory reserved volume. Also, the amount of air that is always present in the lungs even after you forcefully exhale whatever amount, that is called as residual volume. Now, when you define respiratory capacities, what you will do is actually, add up some of the volumes together. Now, looking at the very first, also pay attention to when I am defining any one of these, okay? Definition is very, very important, then you will understand easily what volumes you need to summate, okay? Now, talking about the very first volume, which is inspiratory capacity. Inspiratory capacity, IC, is the total inhalation capacity. What is your total inhalation capacity? I have written it over here. Its value is TV plus IRV. Why do you say that? Is because the total amount of air that you can inhale is the normal one as well as the one that you can forcefully inhale. So this is the normal one, that is TV, and this is the forceful one, which is IRV, which is why its value is TV plus IRV. Exactly in the same way, when you define expiratory capacity or EC, that is the total exhalation capacity. What is your total exhalation capacity? That you can normally exhale, and that is again TV, and the one which you can forcefully exhale out, which is ERV. So you can look at this point. If you are defining expiratory capacity, this is the normal exhalation and this one is the forceful exhalation. I can also write it like this. This is your total expiratory capacity. This was your total inhalation capacity. Clear? Only look at the definition and look what volumes I have added. Now, looking at the other one, which is functional residual capacity or FRC. When you define residual volume, we said that, please focus on the definition. When I said residual volume, that is the total amount of air that is present in your lungs after forceful exhalation, that is always present in your lungs. But what I have written here on the definition of functional residual capacity is total amount of air remaining in the lungs, but after what? After normal exhalation. After normal exhalation, which means, looking at this graph, can you say that this is the normal exhalation? This is the normal exhalation from here till here. So after normal exhalation, what is the total amount of air that is present in your lungs? You can easily see that this is ERV along with RV. That is what the summation ERV plus RV. Okay, then this is the vital capacity or called as VC. Again, the definition is very important. The total amount of air a person can exhale. The total amount of air a person can exhale out, but after what? After forceful inhalation. So you have forcefully inhaled and then you want to see how much can you exhale. So if you forcefully inhale, first look at this. If you forcefully inhale, definitely you are going to take this air, which is tidal volume, normal inhalation. Definitely if you are forcefully inhaling, you will take this volume, which is inspiratory reserve volume. Now we are asking you, after this, what is the total amount that you can exhale? So definitely if you have forcefully inhaled, you are going to exhale out this IRV. You are going to exhale out this TV. Also you can exhale out this ERV. So the vital capacity becomes IRV plus TV plus ERV. That is your vital capacity. That's what I have written it over here. TV plus ERV plus IRV. Clear with this? There is just one difference between vital capacity and the next one, which is total lung capacity. In vital capacity, you say that you are forcefully inhaling and then you want to see how much can you exhale. But when you define total lung capacity, again you say that you have forcefully inhaled. But this time you want to say that after forceful inhalation, what is the total amount that is present in your lungs? You don't want to exhale. After forceful inhalation, what is the total amount of air that is present in the lungs? That is your total lung capacity. So definitely there is just one volume which can be added. After forceful inhalation, you will have IRV, you will have TV, you will have ERV, also you will have RV. So that's the summation of the total lung capacity, which is TV plus IRV plus ERV plus RV. Also you can say that total lung capacity is VC along with RV. So that's about the respiratory volumes and respiratory capacities. Alright, now let's move on to the next part of this topic, this chapter, which is the exchange of gases. So exchange, we have already gathered all the air inside our body. Now we need to exchange this gas. Exchange of the gases is going to take place at two parts that we have already discussed. One exchange will be between your alveoli and the blood capillary supplying there, which is pulmonary capillary, and one of the exchange will be taking place between the tissues and the systemic capillaries. So there are these two exchange. Before I start with the exchange of gases, let us see some of the factors that can affect this exchange. Now looking at the different factors, the very first factor is the partial pressure. Students, we know that air always moves from a region of high partial pressure to a region of low partial pressure. Also, I would want you to please remember all the partial pressures given in your NCERT in a tabular form. Although I have described everything is in this diagram, because if you are aware of all the partial pressures, you can easily diffuse the air. If you know the partial pressure of any XYZ gas in your atmosphere, in your alveoli, in your pulmonary capillary, in your systemic capillary, in your tissues, then it would be very easy for the diffusion, because air is moving from a region of high partial pressure to a region of low partial pressure. Clear? Now talking about the solubility, it is very obvious that the air, the gas which is easily soluble will be transported very fast. There is information I have written over here. Just remember that CO2 is having 20 to 25 times more solubility than that of oxygen. Alright, looking at the third factor, thickness of the membrane. Which membrane we are talking about? We are talking about the membrane through which the diffusion is taking place. The diffusion through the membrane, this I have shown as the alveoli, and we very well know that the blood capillary that you will see near the alveoli through which the exchange is taking place is the pulmonary capillary. So now we know that alveoli is lined by simple squamous epithelium and your pulmonary capillary is also lined by simple squamous epithelium that is specifically called as endothelium. Also there is a yellow color thing I have made in between them, that is the basement substance. So all three of this is going to form the diffusion membrane or the exchange membrane. If I ask you, in the exchange membrane, how many cellular layers are there? Is it 3? No, cellular layer is only this simple squamous epithelium of alveoli and the endothelium of the pulmonary capillary. Basement is a acellular or non-cellular layer. So in total you have got 3 layers through which you are exchanging. And students, thickness should be not too much. Membrane should be thin enough for easy diffusion. And that you can see because your exchange membrane is only having the thickness of less than 1 millimeter, which is very good for the diffusion. Now, looking at this part of the board, you can understand actual exchange taking place at different parts. First of all, try to understand what this diagram is describing. So in the box, this is a rough diagram, students, not exactly appropriate, but yeah, you can understand all the parts of your heart as well as the alveoli, the different blood capillaries through which the exchange is taking place. So these are the 4 chambers of your heart: right atrium, right ventricle having the deoxygenated blood, the left atrium and left ventricle having the oxygenated blood. The capillary, the artery that carries blood away from heart towards the lungs, this is the alveoli, this is the tissue. So from the right side of your heart, from your right ventricle, pulmonary artery is going to carry the blood towards your lungs so that you can transport all the oxygen and diffuse all the oxygen in the pulmonary capillary. Pulmonary capillary further forms pulmonary vein that is going to bring this oxygenated blood back into the heart, into your left atrium, through which it is going to go in your left ventricle, and from the left ventricle, aorta is going to supply to the entire body parts this oxygenated blood. And I have shown one branch which is systemic artery that ultimately forms systemic capillary through which the diffusion is taking place to the tissues. So this diagram hopefully is clear that which part shows what. Students, very important, I am again telling you that there is a table regarding the partial pressure given in your NCERT. If you remember the partial pressure, diffusion will be very easy. Now first we are going to see at the diffusion of the oxygen. Student, the outside part I have shown as atmosphere. Now looking at the partial pressure of oxygen in the atmosphere, it is 159 mmHg. Surely if the oxygen is moving in your alveoli, the PO2 will be less. The PO2 in the alveoli is 104. So from atmosphere 159, it is moving to the alveoli 104 and diffusing in your pulmonary capillary, which is having PO2 as 40 mmHg. Now, can you tell me, if the oxygen is diffused in the pulmonary capillary, will you see the exact partial pressure, 40 partial pressure in the pulmonary vein also? Answer would be surely no, because since you have diffused all the air, oxygen you have diffused, surely the partial pressure is going to rise. And that we are going to see here that the pulmonary vein which carries the blood to the left atrium, further carried to the left ventricle, and aorta which carries the blood from left ventricle supplying to the whole body parts, a branch of the aorta which is systemic artery is having the PO2 as 95 mmHg. That's what I have shown here in the systemic capillary. From 95 mmHg, it is going to be diffused to the tissues where you see PO2 as 40. So just remember the pressure. For atmosphere 159 mmHg oxygen, to the alveoli 104, to the pulmonary capillary 40, from the systemic artery 95, to the tissue 40. Talking about CO2. Now once your cells uses oxygen, it is going to release CO2. In your tissues, you're going to see the partial pressure of CO2 as 45 mmHg. And as it diffuses to the systemic capillary, there the partial pressure of O2 is 40 mmHg. So in your systemic artery, you saw PO2 as 95 and you saw PCO2 as 40. But once you diffuse the CO2 into your systemic capillary, will you see the same exact pressure in the systemic vein? Answer is surely no. Actually, in your systemic vein, the PCO2 that you see is 45 mmHg because you have diffused all the oxygen. Also, the PO2 from 95, since you have diffused everything, the PO2 that you see is 50 mmHg. How can you relate it? Just look at this part. This is going to carry the blood to the right atrium, from the right atrium to the right ventricle, and this pulmonary artery is having this exact pressure 45 and 40. And from 45 mmHg, the CO2 is going to diffuse to the alveoli, where you see partial pressure of oxygen as 40, and from 40 it is diffusing back to the atmosphere, that you see as 0.3 mmHg. So all in all, what you need to remember is this factor, partial pressure. If you remember all the partial pressure, you can easily see how the air is diffusing from a region of high partial pressure to a region of low partial pressure. So remember all the pressures in the atmosphere, alveoli, pulmonary capillary, systemic capillary, and the tissues. Alright students, now let's move on to another topic of this chapter, which is transport of gases. Now we are going to talk about firstly the transport of oxygen. Now looking at the transport of oxygen, oxygen can be transported in your body in two states. When I talk about dissolved in the plasma, that's 3%, and when I talk about bound state with hemoglobin, it's 97%. So 97% of oxygen that is transported bound state with hemoglobin. Looking at hemoglobin, you know that hemoglobin has got two parts. One is heme and other is globin. Oxygen is actually binding with the heme part, and what the heme part is having is iron in the +2 state. One hemoglobin has maximum capacity of binding with 4 oxygen, as it is having 4 Fe+2. So once you know that one hemoglobin has maximally 4 oxygen with its bound state, that is when you say that your hemoglobin is fully saturated. Alright, now these are some of the data that you have to remember, as it is that every 100 ml of your blood has 15 gram of hemoglobin, and 1 gram of hemoglobin can carry 1.34 ml of oxygen. And when you equate these two, you get that 15 gram of hemoglobin can carry 20 ml of oxygen. But remember that this calculation is for 100 ml of your blood. So every 100 ml of your blood has 15 gram of hemoglobin, has carried 20 ml of oxygen. Now talking about this. This is oxygen dissociation curve, where we have plotted the partial pressure of oxygen against the percentage saturation of hemoglobin with oxygen. Not a problem if you don't remember the partial pressures, but remember all the conditions that I have discussed here, which is quite easy. Alright, now when we plot a graph of partial pressure against the percentage saturation, students, what kind of graph I am getting? I am getting a sigmoid curve. I am getting a sigmoid curve, as the oxygen is binding, and at a point we are getting the maximum saturation, 100% saturation. Suppose we are getting at a certain partial pressure, say for example it is 95 mmHg approximately, where in your lungs your air is fully saturated, blood is fully saturated with oxygen. Now I have marked some of the points in this graph. What I have labeled is 75% saturation, 50% saturation, 25% saturation. Now what is this? When students, we are in the normal conditions, that I have written it over here, what we see is 75% saturation. Normal conditions means we are not doing much exercise, we are not doing too much work, we are in the normal physiological condition. When we are at normal physiological condition, what do you see in your blood? Because definitely in the blood, because we are talking about percentage saturation of hemoglobin, that's in your blood. So you are talking about 75% saturation of your blood. What do you mean by this? I have written it over here that during normal physiological condition, if you see in blood 75% saturation, how much ml of oxygen do you see? So 75% of this 20 ml, and we are calculating for 100 ml of blood. So 75% of this 20 ml comes around 15 ml of oxygen. Where is this 5 ml gone? We had 20 ml. This 5 ml is transported to the tissues. I have written 20 minus 15, that is 5 ml at normal physiological condition is being transported to the tissue by every 100 ml of blood. I hope you can do the calculations for 1000 ml of blood, or maybe whatever zeros they are adding, you can change it accordingly. That's in the normal physiological condition. But what if you are doing vigorous exercise, you are doing too much of work? While you do too much of work, while you are doing too much of exercise, what you see is the 25% saturation of your blood. That's what I have written, that during normal condition you see 75% saturation, but during vigorous exercise what do you see is 75% saturation of the blood. And when talking about 75% saturation, you can do easily the calculation for 25%. Now 25% of this 20 ml will surely be 5 ml. Just like that, I have directly written it. You can calculate 25% of the 20 ml is 5 ml. Where is that 50 ml gone? That 15 ml of oxygen is gone to the tissues because you were doing vigorous exercise. So these are the two conditions, two kind of saturation, one 75% and other is 25%. You can do the calculations accordingly. Now what is this 50% saturation? I have written, students, over here what is P50 value. Actually you define P50 value as the partial pressure of oxygen where 50% saturation is seen. 50% saturation of oxygen, 50% saturation of your blood is seen at a certain partial pressure which varies from 25 to 30 mm of Hg. That is called as the P50 value. So that's the description of the oxygen dissociation curve. Now we are going to see next is the different factors which can shift this oxygen, the sigmoid oxygen dissociation curve to right or to the left. Now students, let's look at the different factors that can shift the oxygen dissociation curve either towards the right that I have shown with the purple color or towards the left that I have shown with the yellow color. So shifting towards the right or towards the left. Now I would want all of you to please remember just the different factors for right, because shift to left will be exactly opposite. Now whenever the graph is shifting towards the right, that is always indicating the dissociation. So this dissociation of oxygen is taking place at the level of tissue. So whenever I will be talking about this shift, which is shift to left, will be the association of oxygen that occurs in the alveoli, that is association. So what are the different factors that favors this dissociation of oxygen from the tissues, from the oxygen, from the hemoglobin, that is in the shift to right that we are going to see one by one. So whenever we have already discussed that you need to diffuse, you need to dissociate oxygen, definitely at the tissues, PO2, partial pressure of oxygen, will be low. And when this oxygen is utilized by your cells, your tissues, there PCO2 is high. When PCO2 is high, CO2 is forming, H plus also is high, we are going to see that transport of CO2 leads to the formation of hydrogen ions in the next part. Just remember here that CO2 is high and H plus is also high. When H plus becomes high, pH ultimately becomes low. Since the cells are doing metabolism, your temperature also becomes high. So oxygen is low, CO2 is high, H plus is high, pH is low, and temperature is also very high whenever you need to dissociate the oxygen from the blood occurring in the tissues. See, exactly opposite occurs in the alveoli. PO2 is high, PCO2 is low, H plus is low, pH is high, temperature is also low. That's the factors that leads to the formation of oxyhemoglobin. But students, I have also written one very important factor called as BPG or DPG in the shift to right. Now BPG stands for bis-phosphoglycerate. And since I have written it in the shift to right, so you ultimately know that this is going to cause the dissociation of oxygen. Now what happens? BPG, that is bisphosphoglycerate or diphosphoglycerate, is a product of glycolysis, and whenever this BPG is formed, it binds with the beta globin chain, and when it binds with the beta globin chain of hemoglobin, it causes dissociation of the oxygen. So just remember one factor, the other factors will be clear. Now talking about the transport of CO2. Transport of CO2, unlike oxygen which was transported in two forms, it is transported in three states. Number one, directly diffused into your blood plasma is 7%. Bound state with hemoglobin, students, is known as carbaminohemoglobin, not carboxyhemoglobin, which is 20 to 25% HbCO2. And maximum part of your CO2 is transported as bicarbonate ions. But this bicarbonate ions, I have written it over here, it is dissolved in the plasma. We are going to see how. And that is maximum 70%. So if I ask you how much part is transported in plasma, that would be 70 plus 7, 77%. If I say directly diffused in the plasma, that is 7%. Now when you see this, in RBC, this entire reaction is taking place that results in the formation of this bicarbonate ion and transport. So your CO2 is going inside, this is taking place inside RBC. This entire reaction is taking place inside RBC. What happens is CO2 combines with H2O in presence of the fastest enzyme carbonic anhydrase. It is forming H2CO3, and this H2CO3 again in presence of carbonic anhydrase forms H plus and HCO3 minus. This HCO3 minus, which is formed inside the RBC for its transport, will be diffusing into the plasma, will be coming into the plasma for the transportation process. Now we are going to discuss some other factors like Handlin's effect, Bohr's effect, chloride shift in a single diagram. Now students, this diagram, these two diagrams on the board, this is the gist of whatever we have studied now. In this diagram, you can easily understand the transport of oxygen, the transport of CO2, all the factors of shift to right, all the factors of shift to right, along with some other factors like Bohr's effect, chloride shift, reverse chloride shift, Haldane effect. Although this is not given in NCERT, but just go through it once through this diagram. Also the transport will be again clear. Before that, just make a note that every 100 ml of your deoxygenated blood transports 4 ml of CO2. Just make a note of that. Alright, now on this side of the board I have shown that this is the tissue, this is the systemic capillary, and inside the capillary this is the RBC, and here you have plasma. Now you know that in your tissues what you see is the dissociation of oxygen. Dissociation means shift to right. You will see all the factors of shift to right here, and you will see two phenomena here. One is Bohr's effect and the other is chloride shift, also called as Hamburger's phenomena. Now students, oxygen was transported in two states. One was coming in the plasma, 3% directly diffused to the tissues. One was coming in bound state with hemoglobin, dissociating to form HbH, where this hydrogen ion came that we'll discuss. And oxygen is then released and transported. So oxygen was transported from high partial pressure to low partial pressure. Oxygen used, CO2 formed, CO2 transported now in three states. Now CO2, some part 7% directly diffused in the plasma, 20 to 25% it is combining with hemoglobin, which is usually present as HbH. When it combines with hemoglobin, it is forming HbCO2 and one hydrogen ion is released. Is it clear? Maximum percent of CO2, we have done this reaction in presence of carbonic anhydrase combining with water, forming H2CO3, releasing H plus ions and HCO3 minus. Also students, I told you that bicarbonate which is formed inside the RBC, for its transport will be coming out of RBC in the plasma. But if you do so, you are changing the ionic concentration. To balance out that ionic concentration, what you are doing, you are shifting one chloride ion from the plasma into the RBC. To balance this bicarbonate, you are shifting one chloride ion from the plasma into the RBC, which is called as chloride shift or Hamburger's phenomena. Where is it seen? Obviously shift to right, because this is dissociation of oxygen. Also students, we will know about the Bohr's effect, which is, see, I have circled these hydrogen ions which are released for the transport of CO2, but these hydrogen ions are helping in what? They are helping in this dissociation of HbO2. We said that in shift to right, H plus is very, very high, and due to this H plus ions, the dissociation of HbO2 release this HbH. This is called as Bohr's effect, which is H plus ions required for the dissociation of HbO2 is Bohr's effect. So all this thing is taking place at the level of your tissues. Now talking about the other portion, which is this part. So this is taking place in your lungs, in your alveoli. So this is alveoli, this is the pulmonary capillary, this is again the RBC, and this is the plasma. So exact opposite reactions will be taking place in your alveoli. See, your oxygen 3% diffused in the plasma, your oxygen binding with the hemoglobin this time. Again hemoglobin is present as HbH. When HbO2 is formed, one H plus ion is released. Also CO2 is coming 7% dissolved in the plasma. CO2 is coming bound state with hemoglobin, HbCO2 that dissociates to form HbH, releases CO2 which is transported, and maximum part was coming how? It was coming, students, in the form of this bicarbonate, right? This bicarbonate dissolved in the plasma. So here also bicarbonate is present in the plasma only. Now this bicarbonate, for its transport, again it is going inside the RBC. Combining with hydrogen ion, forming H2CO3, again releasing CO2 which is transported. Now here students, what you have done, you again change the ionic concentration because you shifted one minus ion from outside to inside. To balance this out, what you're going to do is exactly opposite of the chloride shift. What you're going to do is, you're shifting one chloride ion from the RBC into the plasma, from the RBC into the plasma, which is called as reverse chloride shift. And the last thing that is discussed here is Haldane's effect. I have written it that Haldane's effect is exactly opposite to Bohr's effect. Bohr's effect was actually discussing about the transport of oxygen due to the formation of H plus ions. But here you will see that Haldane's effect is discussing the transport of CO2 because of formation of H plus ions. See, whenever HbO2 is formed, one H plus ions is released, and this H plus ions is required for dissociating this HbO2. I have made this arrow. Also it is required for the bicarbonate ions to combine. So Haldane's effect is exactly opposite to Bohr's effect, which discuss about the transport of CO2. Now let us look at the regulation of respiration. We humans have a very efficient system that we can moderate the respiration according to the different conditions required. I have divided the regulation into two parts. One is the nervous regulation and other is the chemical regulation. Looking at the very first nervous regulation, so I have made a rough diagram representing a part which is pons and representing the second part which is medulla. So this area is pons having two center, pneumotaxic center and apneustic center. Remember the location. Pneumotaxic center, apneustic center located in the pons area, and in the medullary area you have the center called as RRC or respiratory rhythm center. You have got RRC or respiratory rhythm center, which is primarily responsible for the regulation. Remember that respiratory rhythm center located in the medulla is primarily responsible for the regulation, any change in the concentration of CO2 or hydrogen ions. Now looking at these two centers, pneumotaxic center and apneustic center can signal the respiratory rhythm center, and then accordingly the changes will take place. Whenever pneumotaxic center is going to give a signal, neural signal causes reduction in the duration of inhalation. So whenever pneumotaxic center is going to give a information to the RRC, reduction in the duration of inhalation is seen. And whenever there is a reduction in the duration of inhalation, what kind of breathe you will show? You are going to see fast breathing because duration is reduced. Whenever this apneustic center is giving signal to the RRC, duration of inhalation is increasing, which means you're going to show a deep breathing. So direct control by the RRC of medulla, and this can moderate the signals pneumotaxic and apneustic by giving signal to the RRC. Now looking at the chemical regulation, there are certain chemoreceptors in your body. I have discussed it as central chemoreceptors, which is located near the respiratory rhythm center. Central chemoreceptors located near the RRC, and peripheral chemoreceptors divided into carotid body and aortic bodies. Now these peripheral chemoreceptors, the aortic bodies are located over the aorta, and the carotid bodies are located over the carotid artery supplying blood to the brain. Also in this big bubble, I have written the most important information. Why this is the most important information is because the chemoreceptors or the regulation, they are only significant or sensitive towards CO2 and H+. Only change in concentration of CO2 and H+ is going to cause the activation changes in the chemoreceptors. Oxygen role is insignificant. There is no role of oxygen at all. Alright, now talking about these, whenever there is an increase in CO2 concentration, increase in H+, you will show more breathing, that is natural. And vice versa, if your CO2 concentration and H+ concentration is high. But remember, they don't respond towards change in concentration of oxygen. The last part of the chapter is the different disorders related with the respiratory system. Now let's begin with the first disorder, which is asthma. Asthma is an acute respiratory disease where you see difficulty in breathing. Difficulty in breathing, specifically the term is used as dyspnea. Alright, now students, what happens in asthma is the inflammation seen in the wall of bronchi and bronchioles. The inflammation is seen in the wall of bronchi and bronchioles, which also shows wider contractions called as spasm. They show wider contractions called as spasm. Very difficulty in breathing, several other breathing problems are observed, and a specific type of sound is produced while you breathe, that is called as wheezing sound. So if you are asked wheezing sound, that is specifically related with the asthma, and inflammation taking place in the wall of bronchi and bronchioles. Alright, let's move to the next disorder, which is emphysema. Students, emphysema literally means full of air. When you see the meaning of emphysema, it means full of air. Now, why do you see it's full of air? I have written that it is a chronic disorder, long-term disorder, which is due to excessive cigarette smoking. Excessive cigarette smoking causes emphysema. Now compare it with asthma. Asthma was because of allergic infections. Okay, I didn't mention that. It is mainly because of allergic infections due to pollen dust or maybe because of anything. This is because of the excessive cigarette smoking. This was causing inflammation in the wall of bronchi and bronchioles. But when you talk about emphysema, what is damaged is alveoli. And once your alveoli is damaged, it is the part we have seen that through which exchange is taking place. Now, if you damage alveoli, that means exchange will not take place. You have reduced the surface area for the exchange. That's what I have written, reduced surface area for exchange. As a result of which your alveoli is filled with air, inflation, full of air. That is the word meaning of emphysema. That's the comparison of both. Now looking at the last disorder, which is occupational respiratory disease. As the name is suggesting occupation, it is because of the occupation of a person. Now, a lot of industries are there, petroleum industries, coal industries, stone baking industries, where a hell lot of pollution is there, a hell lot of dust is there. And slowly what is happening, it is going to cause a serious damage to the lungs. In fact, the workers in such industries should wear masks because so much of dust is produced that dust is going to cause fibrosis. The fibrocytes are going to replace your cells in the lungs and there is a fiber formation in the upper 1/3 part of lungs. And specifically, if you want to identify which are the occupational respiratory disorders, which students is also called as pneumoconiasis. Pneumoconiasis is the other name of occupational respiratory diseases. Fibrosis is seen and difficulty in breathing. So specifically if I say asbestosis, you should know that asbestosis is an occupational respiratory disease because of the dust asbestos. When I say silicosis is specifically an occupational respiratory disease because of the silicon. So specific chemical related with the specific disorder's name. Is it clear? Now these were some of the disorders mentioned in your NCERT. Although we have discussed a lot in this chapter, but still I would want all of you to please go through your NCERT. Don't miss any line of NCERT, which is very, very important, because I'm already again and again telling you the questions are framed from exactly lines picked up from the NCERT. So that's all. We have done the breathing and respiration chapter. Thank you all of you. Take care and bye-bye.